Canada's past of being one of the first nations to take part in international peacekeeping has given the nation its positive reputation. However, while Canada had an altruistic past, the current reality is almost the opposite. With growing tensions rising internationally fueled by socioeconomic as well as environmental factors, the pressure for Canada to contribute more is growing substantially. While promises to provide more troops to international peacekeeping efforts have been made by the Liberal government, few improvements have been made. Even worse, current issues within the Canadian peacekeeping forces still remain largely under wraps. With all these concerns, one significant question arises: can Canadian Parliament be held legally accountable for their lack of action? Within my research, I looked at two main concerns regarding Canadian peacekeeping: sexual assault cases within the CPF, and the growing issue of climate change in relation to Canadian peacekeeping. While individuals in need look to peacekeepers as sources of aid, the power that Canadian peacekeepers have is often misused. Due to this power imbalance, most cases of sexual assault go unsolved with little to no justice for the individuals harmed. In a 1998 Maclean's report, 13 victimized women were interviewed, including accounts of rape at gunpoint and the rape of a woman with a developmental delay. In addition, there have been over 70 reported incidents within just 3 months. To deal with these reports, the UN shares any findings of misconduct with Canada. When the accused is not a member of the RCMP, the onus is on the individual's police force to conduct an investigation and discipline the accused. However, there's a gap in the criminal code under Section 7, subsection 4, that allows a peacekeeper who commits sexual assault abroad to be immune to any charges in Canada. Due to the gap that currently exists, an investigation cannot even happen. To investigate why it would be advantageous to improve Canada's peacekeeping efforts, I looked to Mali as a prime example of how Canada had benefited from peacekeeping efforts. Our nation is one of Mali's largest foreign aid donors, and we have a bilateral trade agreement. The investments made add up to hundreds of millions of dollars. For Canada, Mali is quite literally a gold mine. By providing the country with aid including $44 million after their 2012 crisis and $152 million on development spending, Canada actually benefits politically and economically. This timeline depicts the highlights of Canada's contributions within the past 15 years, including $39 million in counterterrorism initiatives in 2010, and becoming the 9th largest contributor to the $8 billion budget for the country's stabilization mission between 2016 and 2017. With the growing issue of climate change, socioeconomic issues are worsening globally as well. These increasing tensions put great pressure on Canada to improve peacekeeping efforts as a means to maintain relationships with other nations. Considering the mass migration due to severe weather conditions, and by effect increased spread of disease, terrorism, piracy, and more, the pressure is on. The Liberal government's defense policy even noted that in order to effectively reach their goals to promote peace and security, relationships with African countries would need to improve. This aid is required for counterterrorism efforts, disaster response operations, and capacity-building activities. Specifically, the 2016 La Francophonie Summit major discussion points were climate change and anti-terrorism, solidifying the need for Canada to greatly improve efforts. This issue gives Canada great incentive to commit peacekeeping troops to Madagascar. However, Madagascar isn't the only nation in need of help, and with the negative effects of climate change getting progressively worse, the number of nations in need isn't getting any smaller. By contributing more troops, the Canadian government makes more allies around the globe with the common goals that La Francophonie embodies. So, the Liberal government didn't follow through with their election promise to improve humanitarian aid efforts. How can we hold them accountable? The short answer is, we can't. According to a study, Trudeau's government has failed to uphold over half of their promises. The most we can do is vote them out of office later. However, when action is required now, this is quite ineffective. Due to the format of our legal and governmental systems, making candidates legally accountable for their election promises would be contrary to Dicey's rule of law, which states that, to be effective, the rule of law requires a separation among those who make the law, those who interpret it and apply it, and those who enforce it. The separation of legislative, executive, and judicial powers means that laws are to be made by Parliament and interpreted by the courts. By allowing courts to enforce election promises, Judges would have to oversee government operations and have the ability to force Parliament to legislate in specific ways and review legislation to abide by previous promises. So, to summarize, is the CPF a mess? Yes. Not only did we go from having over 3,000 troops in the early 90s to less than 40 in 2018, but the issue of sexual assault is deeply embedded into the system. No Canadian should be above the law when it comes to sexual offenses, especially Canadians working for the United Nations. Is there a reason to improve our efforts? Yes. The world's poorest countries do the most in peacekeeping and suffer the most casualties, while the richer ones, like Canada, sit back and watch. Obviously, greater good isn't in our best interest, but for political and economic gain, improving relationships with African countries is. Is climate change significant to the future of Canadian peacekeeping? Yes. It is already playing a large role in tensions rising within foreign nations. In turn, the issue has been putting immense stress on Canadian government to follow through with their promises for peace, as illustrated through the La Francophonie Summit. And lastly, my legal research question. Can Canadian Parliament be held legally accountable for failing to meet promises with regards to international peacekeeping? No. With the current structure of our legal and governmental systems, the only way to combat failed electoral promises is through the ballot box.